Today, Caucasian Journal is pleased to welcome Dr. Sebastian Schäffer, Director of the Institute for the Danube region and Central Europe, IDM in Vienna, Austria. Welcome to Caucasian Journal, Sebastian. You are the head of this Vienna-based think tank, studying Central and Eastern Europe for many years. How can you introduce IDM to our viewers and readers today?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to have the possibility to talk to you today, and I'm very honored that we have the possibility to have this conversation. If I would briefly describe what we are doing, we are centered around what we call 5 Ps, and these Ps are one of the most important things is our platform. We work with 19 different countries in the wider Danube region, and we have institutions that we work together in that region. We have, furthermore, our second P is our publications. We have various formats of publications, policy papers, a scientific journal, a science communication journal. And with this, we try to fulfill part of our mission, which is to also inform the broader public about what is happening in our target region. And we do this with our third P, which is our public events. We organize around 50 per year, closed door, summer schools, but also open seminars and discussions where we invite the broader public to get in touch with us and to discuss pressing matters. The fourth P is our projects. One of the specialties that our institute is doing is EU enlargement for both enlargement regions, so the Western Balkans and the former Eastern Partnership associated trio that includes also Georgia by extension, although we all know that the situation currently is not very pro EU integration in the country, unfortunately. And the last one is our policy analysis, so the expertise that the team has. We have a very small team, but a very dedicated team, and each and everyone tries to write op-eds, give interviews like this, and reach out across borders to keep the conversation going that we think is very vital.
I have a connected question about the think tanks in general. In your view, what's the impact of the think tanks on the practical policies today, generally, and in your case?
It's hard to measure how such an impact is happening, because most of the times you try to steer a conversation and bring ideas into the conversation that is ideally sold to decision makers as if they would have come up with it. So the overall, the best way is always to present something as if it would have been their idea. So they're not easy benchmarks to measure this. But I think within the conversation and within presenting ideas and exchanging these ideas, you can see that there is a certain impact. What we have done, for instance, at IDM, where I consider us having had a certain contribution, was, for instance, the question of the Schengen integration of Bulgaria and Romania. As you know, Austria vetoed their accession 2 years ago, and we then, together with the Romanian embassy and with the Bulgarian embassy, we tried to make cases why it would be time for them to join Schengen. Ultimately, you know that they did. They are now full Schengen members. So I'm not claiming that we have done this, but I think the role of think tanks is to bridge that, so to say, gap between certain decisions that are made and maybe the assessments of impact from different actors, be it the society, but also be it diplomacy.
Now, we are representing the South Caucasian region. So my next question was about the perception, or how do you see this region from the heart of Europe, actually, and more generally from Europe? Because while, for instance, the Georgians identify themselves strongly with Europe, dating back to the Golden Fleece, and the Armenians, go even deeper to the times of the Bible. The view from the Europe might be really different. So how is our region really perceived from Vienna and from European Union?
This is a very relevant and good question, but very difficult to answer because I think there are many answers to that. There is a lack of understanding of the history in those countries. Although we have neighboring countries, we know far too less about the culture and the traditions that shape the perception in those countries. And that, of course, by extension, gets even less when we go to the South Caucasus. So, for instance, what you mentioned with regards to the biblical meaning of today's Armenia, I don't think that a lot of people in Austria are aware of that. And it's very sad that we don't have this understanding of the broader European history that shaped us ultimately all, because Georgian's history has an influence on our everyday life, even if we don't really see that. But Austria is also, yeah, not completely again, but it's also a dominant wine country. And I mean, this comes from Georgia. Yeah, the history of winemaking comes from Georgia. Having worked in all three South Caucasus countries and knowing how some parts of the especially Armenian and Georgian society have a desire to have closer ties to the European Union. And when I started to study the Rose Revolution happened in Tbilisi, and that shaped my overall perception. I even wrote my magister thesis on color revolutions. And so I'm absolutely not an expert, but I think we forget that this is a more than 2 decades struggle to move closer to the European Union, and we tend to ignore this, and until something puts it on the table, and that is most of the time a bad thing. We see that in Ukraine, and we see also the development in Georgia at the moment, unfortunately.
Georgia is still the only country from our region to receive the European Union candidate status. And we are all witnessing this strong internal struggle here between pro-European and anti-European forces. Many observers say that Georgia has already missed its historical window of opportunity to join European Union. What do you think about the European attitude? Will it be shaped by fatigue and reluctance regarding our region and Georgia in particular? Or would Armenia, for example, become actually the new locomotive and shift places with Georgia?
Let me say, first of all, I really deeply regret this development because, I mean, as I said, I think that the Georgian society has fought for 2 decades to receive that candidate status. And then suddenly this window of opportunity opened, they got it, and then immediately stopped from the political side to seize this moment. And this is really something that I deeply regret. That doesn't mean that it is over. I think there's always opportunity, and it's good that they use the possibility to actually receive that status, yeah? So that they applied and received the status. This is something that is there, and you can build from that. It's going to be harder for Armenia to get there, I would say. Yeah? Even if they maybe are more determined from a political side, it will be hard to receive a candidate status. I don't think that this is that there will be a momentum for them anytime soon, because what we see currently in the discussion in, unfortunately, many member countries is again the shift towards, can we actually do that? Are we ready? And you can see that there is a lot of countries, including Austria, including, for instance, also Czechia, that have been very in favor of enlargement traditionally since they joined the EU. Austria 2 decades earlier than Czechia, but nevertheless. But now the latest Eurobarometer shows that in these countries and others as well, there's no majority in favor of enlargement anymore. And that is paradoxical, because I think the momentum for enlargement has not been that good in the past 2 decades. And this shows a gap between the political will from the side, also especially of the European Commission, and the different developments in the EU societies. And this gap is widening, and you see that there is not a simultaneous development of progress with regards to European enlargement, and a lack of communication why it's actually beneficial to have EU enlargement. And this is going to be, we are heading towards a cliff. Because when Ursula von der Leyen promised the candidate status, and the 3 countries, Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia, received it, this is a result of the war of aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine, which is right, and it's absolutely the right direction. But this promise is given, and there will be countries that will deliver. I'm seeing this in the will in Ukraine is there. They have, of course, now the Russian aggression, just like Georgia, in the country. The will in Moldova is there. They can do that politically. The will in other countries of the Western Balkans is there. We will arrive at a situation that there will be countries fulfilling the acquis communautaire, and then the EU member countries will have to decide, will we let them in or not? And this will be a unique situation, because if they are refusing to let a country in, even if they fulfill the criteria, and we have seen that with Schengen, for instance, Bulgaria, Romania fulfilled the criteria, but they still were not let in. And if we arrive at this situation when it comes to EU enlargement, I'm afraid that this is the end of EU enlargement, because what would be an incentive to do all these painful reforms that are demanding on a political level, also a societal level, if you cannot be sure that if you do fulfill all the criteria, that you are actually admitted into the club. And this will happen in the next couple of years. And I don't think we are ready for this situation.
I see. Well, speaking about the enlargement and the candidate countries, of course, we cannot miss Moldova, especially as you have recently returned from Moldova after observing the parliamentary elections in this country. Well, reports about the fairness of those elections are rather mixed. So I would really like to learn your feelings, as the exact information is scarce, so we can only talk about feelings, I believe. So what are your personal impressions from that visit? And how would you assess the Moldova's democratic progress and current prospects of EU integration?
This is again a very good question, but we need to look at different layers again. So on the one hand, my personal impression was that there is a lot of. So I was in Chisinau on election day, but we were also in Ryškova, which is a smaller village, 40 kilometers away from the capital. And of course, there's a very different, and in Chisinau on Sunday there was electoral silence. So there are no billboards, no advertisements, nothing. But there were people on the streets where you could see, they're heading to the polls, or there were even people carrying signs not to vote for any party because that's forbidden, but they would just carry signs and say, "Go to vote." And of course, in the village, it was they have different priorities. Yeah, they need to take care of the agriculture and do these kind of things. You would not know that there is an election going on, but there was in the capital it was a tension that was not as high as it was compared to 2024. I was also there when the presidential election happened, and there they were much more nervous because there was also this EU referendum. But the referendum was not about EU uh, integration, but it was rather about changing the constitution and adding this to the Moldovan constitution, that the goal of European integration is the goal of Moldova. But people were nervous that if the vote would be against it, that this would be the end of the integration process. It was much more important that the parliament has a solid majority of pro-European parties than this referendum, but the tension was different. And here you see when you say like this feelings, yeah, people had a different feeling to it, which was interesting because I think the parliamentary vote was much more decisive. And it surprised everyone that the ruling party, the party of President Maya Sandu, Party of Action and Solidarity, won again an absolute majority, which enables them now to progress into European integration. They don't have to have a coalition partner. And this was not necessarily because the people wanted to vote for pass, but they wanted this pro-European path, and there was no alternative. There was not a promising EU integration party on the ballot that would make it into parliament. And this is also a danger because, of course, it gives a monopoly to pass. And here I come to the question of the electoral integrity. Yeah? There have been allegations now, especially from the opposition parties, that pass, for instance, tried to hinder the people that live in the Transnistrian region of the country to participate in the election, because there was a lot of, they closed bridge crossings, and they did not provide that many polling stations. But the major point here is, of course, that they need to provide electoral integrity, and they cannot give polling stations into a region where they de facto don't have control over. And the second allegation was that they only opened two voting stations in the Russian Federation, and you only have 5,000 ballots per voting station. So only 10,000 votes could be cast in the Russian Federation, whereas there have been 278,000 votes cast in total by the diaspora. And here, of course, it's clear that the majority in Russia would vote for pro-Russian parties, and the majority in the West would probably vote for Maya Sandu, which also the results clearly show. And the diaspora vote saved Maya Sandu's presidency, the referendum, and also the absolute majority. But again, if you want to preserve the electoral integrity, and this is also something that I learned from talking with official electoral observers, that this is a necessary measure, and that the overall election was free and fair. And ultimately, I don't see that there is a challenge to that, that there is a claim, a substantial claim to challenge the integrity of the elections. Quite the contrary. But I need to have a half sentence additionally to that, because right now there are allegations against one of the parties that made it surprisingly into parliament, the Democracy at Home party, which was not showing up in the polls, but then boosted through TikTok, quite similar to what happened in Romania. Coincidentally, they are cooperating with the unionist forces in Romania, the nationalist forces there, and made it into parliament. The Electoral Commission is now looking into illegal boosting of that party through social media and trying to evaluating if they are banning it. And I think this would be a wrong move, even if it's legally probably correct. But I think this will just drive more people into this conspiracy theories that there was election hampering. And if you allow me just one more sentence, the most influence, also money-wise, came from the Russian Federation or through an oligarch called Ilan Shor. There were allegedly $200 million poured into the country. This is around a percentage of the GDP of the whole country to finance vote buying. But the Moldovan authorities learned from 2024. They managed to prevent this. And how did they do this? The police sent the ones that were discovered that they sold their votes in 2024 a letter, and they had to appear at the police station. They were not fined, they were not jailed, but they were told that this is illegal. And that prevented a lot of vote buying, a lot of money went into the pockets of Moldovan oligarchs, but not to the voters. And this, I think, is a success for the democracy in Moldova, and I hope they can continue with this. Sorry, I was a bit long, but it was a very interesting experience to be in the country here.
Indeed, it's a very interesting experience, and it's very, very valuable information for us and for all the readers. This kind of drives me to the more like theoretical questions about how the European Union performs and what's the future of European Union. When we talk about EU integration, the discussion often revolves around the laws and institutions. Will you agree that the essence is deeper? I mean, the values, the identity, and the ability of societies to build trust in democratic systems. And if this is true, does the erosion of democracy within some EU member states pose a danger to the Union as a whole in the future?
Absolutely. I think only tend to realize what we have in certain cases when it's gone. And we could see that with, for instance, free movement within the European Union when the COVID pandemic hit. The things we take for granted that are taken away are only missed when they don't no longer exist. And there's a huge danger because these demagogues and authoritarians try to tell you you will be better off without the European Union. We can do it much better on our own, and we will save our nation and whatsoever. We've been there, we've done that, it didn't work. And the European Union, with all its flaws, and we need to criticize the EU, and we need to criticize the Commission, and we need to do better, and we need to hold them accountable. But there is no better alternative out there, and we will not be better on our own. But of course, it's going to be hard to tell the people in Moldova, hey, go out and vote and do that path. Or even worse, tell the people in Georgia, yeah, continue to go on the street, risk your lives, and risk being imprisoned and face consequences. Or even worse than that, tell the Ukrainians, yes, fight on the battlefield for the freedom and lose your lives and defend our freedoms. And then at home, we have parties winning elections that want to dismantle these freedoms. And we have not managed in over 7 decades of European integration to really find this common resilience against this disinformation that is coming. Again, let's debate about how to make it better, but dismantling it, undermining it, will not be the solution. And it saddens me that we are not able to better communicate at home what those people in Moldova, in Georgia, in Ukraine, but also in the Western Balkans are striving for and dying for. And this is not an exaggeration; it's a fact, unfortunately.
You often speak about the future scenarios for Europe. If we fast forward to, for instance, year 2030, what kind of Europe do you imagine? And where do you see countries like Georgia or Moldova fitting into that picture?
Cool. So when we develop scenarios, you normally look at best case, worst case kind of developments, and maybe we look at the best case, at the worst case, and what realistically might happen. In a best case scenario, of course, we will see by 2030 new members joining. We will have countries like Moldova, Montenegro, Albania, but maybe even North Macedonia, Ukraine joining because they have the will. Ideally, there is also a certain development in Serbia, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Kosovo, and also in Georgia that would enable a future membership. I don't see it happening until 2030, but with the other countries, I could see it. And as a side note, we did an analysis last year at IDM, and the average period of the successful negotiations for EU enlargement were 3.5 years. So it's doable to finalize negotiations. Joining and ratifying, that's a different process and takes longer, but it might be possible. The worst case is, of course, what I described a little already. We might have countries that fulfill the criteria. We cannot get every country to sign the accession treaty, and that will be the end of EU enlargement as we know it. And I think this ultimately would also be the end of EU integration, and then authoritarianism has won. What is realistic? I think we need to work on the perception within the societies of the EU member countries. That's a big task in the next 5 years until 2030 to really get a majority of the population behind EU enlargement, explain better why this is the right way, why this makes sense, while remaining critical at the same time. So realistically, I see that there is progress towards EU enlargement, maybe one or the other country even joining, but it will be a huge effort on both sides. But it ultimately we have to decide: do we want a Europe of nations, as many foresee it in the European Parliament and in some national capitals, or do we want freedom to win? And I think freedom must win, and the best way to preserve freedom is European integration. And I really do hope that we realistically will be able to grow out of these crises, because the EU has been forged in crisis, and realistically we might end up with new member countries, because we have the longest period of non-enlargement in the history, and it's time to end this, at least for the one or the other country.
Right. Well, thank you very much. And if you feel like adding anything, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much again for the invitation and the exchange. Thank you for the great questions. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing. And I would just say to the readers, support the Caucasian Journal wherever you can. They do great work and they do necessary work. And I think this is more critical than ever to achieve what I just described. Thanks a lot, and best regards from Vienna.
Thank you. This is really, really appreciated.
We cover what matters. Caucasian Journal.